Hello and welcome to Healthy Kingston. I'm your host, Janet Wade. We have a very busy program today, which is going to be focused on our local environment. However, before we address that topic, I would like to give a brief overview on COVID in the town. We currently have 15 cases and there have been 3,412 people who've been vaccinated for COVID. There will be clinics coming up in the month of April and would ask that you just check on the website to see when they are going to be happening. They're still in progress being planned. So that's of March 24th, our taping today. We have 15 cases, so we've come a long way, fortunately. So with that said, I'd like to now focus our program on our three guest speakers, which I'm very fortunate to have. They are definitely environmentalists and very concerned about our community and our welfare. So it's a pleasure to have them here today. The first one being Matt Pinella, who's our conservation agent. Pine DuBois, who is the president of the Jones River Landing, and she is the executive director of the Jones River Watershed Association. Got that right?
Got it.
And Jean Landis Naumann, who's the chairman of the Kingston Recycling Committee. So again, thank you all for being with us. So with that said, Matt, would you please tell us a little bit about your position as the conservation agent for Kingston?
Sure. So as conservation agent, probably my main role is in support of the Conservation Commission. So the Conservation Commission is responsible for protection of wetlands in town. So anytime anybody's doing any work within 100 feet of a wetland or 200 feet of a stream, that's what we call commission jurisdiction. The commission has the ability to oversee those projects and permit those and apply any conditions that it feels are necessary to protect those wetland resources. So my role is to take in information, do research, and make sure the commission can make informed decisions.
Okay.
So that way your commission does not have to consist of wetland experts. It can consist of people who care and who want to make a difference. And we can do some of the legwork for them. Beyond that, I say one of the main roles of my position is support for the people of Kingston. So in some towns, or even in this town, you may have some people saying, you know, that conservation is the people you never want to let on your property. And what I like to look at it as, I'm actually here for the people of Kingston, and we have an assistant agent as well. And our office is here so that if any resident wants to call and ask us questions that can help them avoid trouble and avoid getting into any issues with conservation, then we help them do that.
Okay.
That's one beneficial resource.
Great.
Beyond that, we manage conservation land. So there's a lot involved with management, not only of the ecological and environmental part of the conservation land, but the human interaction with that. From trails and trespass and improper use.
Okay.
My position also is a stormwater coordinator for the town, and we handle a lot of different grant applications and grant management for a lot of different programs.
Yeah, can we speak to that for a little bit? So what is the plan in place for stormwater runoff?
So there's what's called the NIPDES system permit, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And that's an EPA program that Kingston is a part of. Since 2016, that program essentially says that it's a permit that allows you to put stormwater off into what they call waters of the United States, which for our purposes, we could consider to be wetlands, whether it's ponds, rivers, the ocean. It's a way of regulating what ends up in those systems. And a lot of people have heard the term MS4, the MS4 permit. They're essentially one and the same. MS4, it stands for, there's 4 M's. Municipal, of course I was gonna just lose it. Pine, do you have it off the top of your head?
Nope.
No?
Municipal is good enough. Municipal stormwater.
It's it's municipal, stormwater, and sewer.
Right.
I knew I was going to not have it off the top of my head, but essentially what it is that we can't let all of those types of systems flow off into our wetlands. And it's an extensive permit process that we actually contract out to a private company that handles all of our compliance with that, thankfully, because it is very intensive. So we have a contractor who goes out and does things like, they call it illicit discharge detection and elimination. And that means they go out and they look for little areas where somebody might have taken their sump pump or something from their property and piped it into a public catch basin, any areas where there might be septic leaking somewhere or sewer leaking, things like that. So there's a lot that goes into that, and the overall purpose of that is just to clean up our waterways and make everybody that lives here a little healthier.
Sure. I know on the conservation website, there is a Greenscapes program. So obviously you support it. Can you explain to us what that's about?
Yeah, and so the Greenscapes program is something I think also EPA supports. And it's not that I necessarily am huge on the Greenscapes program, but that subject matter in particular for me is really important. And it's the concept that our landscapes in suburban areas particularly now dominate the greater surface area of our country, really, and especially Eastern Massachusetts. And there are things we can do and choices we can make, not only in what we grow, but in how we maintain it, that can actually support a lot of different organisms in a way that the habitat that previously existed there before we suburbanized it did. So there's a lot of talk over the last decade or so about an author, Doug Tallamy, and that's sort of his concept now. As he calls it, homegrown national park, which basically the idea is that a lot of species are going to go extinct if we can't support them where we live. And it tries to get everybody to think about, rather than cutting that tree down just because you don't like that it shades half of your house, that tree, if it's, let's say, a white oak, might support 450 different species of just caterpillars, never mind all the other types of invertebrates it can support. And from that point, supports all of the birds, and there's a whole, call it trophic cascades, the whole basically circle of life or food chain can be supported by insects that are growing on native plants on your property.
So it sounds like it would behoove people, if they want to alter the landscape of their property at all, to take a look at that website and see, what exactly would be the impact on the environment of what they're doing.
Yeah, or contact our office. I mean, Mike and I, Mike is the assistant agent. Mike and I both have a solid background in this sort of stuff, and it's a passion. So anytime we use that sort of thing, even during filings, when you have somebody who's filing, looking to modify something near a wetland, that's something that we can use as mitigation sometimes, is just trying to get them to use native plants and maintain native plants in a way that can benefit local ecology. So you can check the Greenscapes page. You can check out any of Doug Tallamy's books. Go down to the library and pick them up. They're amazing. Or just give us a shout and say, hey, what can I do?
Terrific, because I know, I even think myself, how often do we really give that kind of thing thought? We're more onto our agenda than saying, well, what would really benefit the environment around me? So that's a wonderful service. Also on your website is the Blue Massachusetts education campaign. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think they might have changed the name recently. It's called Think Blue Massachusetts, and it relates all back to that MS4 and NIPD's stuff. It's the stormwater.
Okay.
And it's just educational materials that get people to think about these sort of things, because it's present. We're beyond the days where, and let's just say we're not totally beyond, but we should be beyond the days where people are changing their oil and taking it out to the catch basin and dumping it because they don't have to see it again. I mean, when people do things like that, it affects everybody. It affects the local ecology, it affects human health. So it's essentially just ways and information to try to get people to minimize their impact on stormwater, because it even relates back to the Greenscapes thing, where you have a lawn. Lawns themselves are not good for ecology. They're essentially dead zones, and they require a huge amount of chemical input to survive. And then if you have your person who comes and sprays fertilizer all over the place, but it doesn't go into the lawn, it goes out into the driveway, which then runs out to the street and the catch basin. Now you have an input. Now you have phosphorus, nitrogen running down, and that's going to affect all the waterways down the chain in terms of lowering oxygen level, increasing algae, and just basically making it so nothing can live in the water.
Right. Yeah. Excellent points that we all need to be thinking about. Thank you. Again, I'd like to introduce Pine DuBois, the executive director of the Jones River Watershed Association. And the watershed mission is to protect, enhance, and restore the quality of the natural resources in southeastern Massachusetts, in particular the Jones River and Cape Cod Bay. So again, a perfect guest to speak to water resources in our area. So Pine, what would you say is the condition of the Jones River currently?
Better than it was 20 years ago before we had sewer in the tidal reach. Much better, but it's still on the 303D list, which is the national impaired waters list governed by the EPA that Matt mentioned a little bit ago. So we're not perfect yet. We're better. We have the ability to have some shellfish out in the bay at the mouth of the river. But that gets closed if it rains very much because of what Matt just mentioned in terms of pollutants getting flushed down the river inadvertently. So the town has done a tremendous amount of work in the last 20 years in terms of putting in the town sewer and upgrading the stormwater systems that are mostly in the tidal area of Kingston. But that's not the only thing that affects the Jones River. You know, if you're far upstream and the cranberry bogs, for instance, any of those additives that are put on the landscape ultimately get discharged, and there's too much of it. You know, it's taken us a long time to learn to moderate our lifestyle a little bit. We got a long way to go, I think, you know, in terms of almost everything we use. But fertilizer is a huge one. And so is the way we handle our waste, whether it's our septic systems or, you know, waste from the old gas and everything. I think Kingston, and I'm glad you have Jean here, you know, in the recycling committee, I think Kingston has improved that sort of waste chain management. So we have more of that that's being recycled. But again, we've got a very long way to go, and people shouldn't give up on that. So it's improving. Last year, we hit a great marker because of the dam removals that have been done in the Jones that we've had a lot to do with, the Watershed Association and the town working together. That has meant that the Jones River is now considered a cold water fishery, which means that there are more trout throughout the Jones because trout need cold fresh water. And the Jones River is unique for that in Massachusetts. So it's really a great, big, huge milestone, but it does also elevate the standard of discharge to the river because now the Jones River is also considered an outstanding resource, an outstanding water resource throughout its reach from the bay all the way to Silver Lake. I'm very excited about that, but it does mean that we want to elevate, escalate our efforts to really find those MS4 failures that Matt was speaking about and correct them. And it's going to take a mighty effort on the part of the town and a part of us and volunteers, I think, throughout town. I think maybe we should ramp up an Earth Day project to go pick up all those nips and get all that nonsense out. And, you know, including, you know, when people take out bags to pick up their dog waste as they're walking their dog along, don't just throw the bag with the dog waste in the bushes. You know, you got to take it home and discharge it properly.
Exactly. Great. Now, the both of you, I'd really like to see you chime in, Matt and Pine. The impact of climate change on our town. Everybody's talking about climate change these days. And what would you have to say about that, particularly flooding in the town?
I'll let Pine jump in there and I can tie up at the end.
The Watershed Association has a grant with the Seaport Economic Council because of Jones River Landing. You know, even though we're not in the velocity zone of the bay, we are 1.5 miles upstream, we flood already. We have feet of water in our buildings. It's very disturbing to me that that it's still a discussion whether there's climate change or not. There's climate change. The tide is, we bought this place in 2003. The astronomical high tide, yearly high tide, is a foot higher today than it was when we bought the place.
Wow.
And that means we get a lot more water when we get nor'easters. Those are our big problem. But people that do travel Landing Road know it floods. It floods because the tide and the river are up so high.
Right.
Massachusetts, the rate of flooding is faster and higher here than in most places in the world, and it's because of the Gulf Stream. And I think we have to wake up faster and in a bigger hurry in order to address that and start doing the things that are in our control to do. Stop leaving your car idling when you go to the grocery store. Same with
simple
town.
things.
Town should just
Right.
shut off those motors whether you're police or highway. You don't
Right.
need to idle those motors all the time. We need to hurry up, transfer out of the fossil fuels and into electric vehicles. We have to have charging stations in town. But what we're doing is doing studies of what do we have to do. We're going to either, have to raise a whole lot of money in order to elevate our buildings, or we're going to have to just take everything down and let it flood. So, there is a tremendous amount of work that this town has to do. We share a big coast, an important coast. The species are changing. The temperature of the water is changing. And the storms we're going to experience are going to really, show us more who's in charge here, and it's
Right.
not us.
Well, certainly this is a major issue for a number of people in the area, and it's a timely concern is the dumping of radioactive waste into Cape Cod Bay, or the potential of it being dumped into Cape Cod Bay. I know no decisions have been made yet by the Holtec International company that purchased the Pilgrim nuclear power plant and decommissioned it in 2019. Matt, your thoughts on this?
Again, I'm going to defer to Pine on that. She's been working on all of the stuff involving the Pilgrim plant for a lot of years. All I know is what I've heard recently and what the report from Holtec was, where they thought there wasn't going to be any negative effect from it, but I don't know anything beyond that.
Yeah, Pine.
So, so the decommissioning is ongoing. I was at the plant Tuesday, spent a couple of hours there, which I go periodically to make sure I know what's happening in real time. The water that we're talking about is the last of the industrial water that's on site. And no, they're not releasing it this year because they're still using the pool and everything to cut up the reactor. You said it was decommissioned in 2019. No, it's ongoing decommissioning. They'll have most of the industrial area cleaned up by 27, they hope, 2027. But we'll still have, 63 or so big 20-foot tall casts sitting on Rocky Hill Road that are filled with radioactive material that was left over from the plant generating energy for 50 years. That stuff lasts 1 million years, okay? That waste is hazardous for 1 million years. That is a big issue that we have to deal with. As far as the water is concerned, the water is about 1 million gallons. It is in the spent fuel pool. As they cut the reactor apart, they're putting some of those parts in the pool to keep them, chill, not let the radioactivity escape while they package it and whatnot in order to ship those things out of town. Once they're finished with all of that, which may be as soon as this fall, they intend to filter the water, test the water, see what's in the water. We're pretty sure there'll be some remnants after the filtering of metals and of other substances, including radioactive isotopes. The most concerning is probably tritium, because tritium can't be filtered out. And so the question is how much tritium is going to be in there. The fact of the matter is, though, and the reason that I'm not as upset about the fact that we have to deal with this is tritium is already in the ground. It's already leaking into Cape Cod Bay. It's happening every day, and it's been going on for 50 years. This is the last of it. It's you know, of our issue, not the beginning of it. So I think that in conversation with Holtec, remembering that they want to be a major decommissioning industry. I mean, these people, Holtec Ukraine, you know, packaged up the spent fuel in Chernobyl, you know, only in December 2020. You know, they're a big company. We need them to do this kind of work. My position with them is we're going to figure out if it's okay before you do it. Okay, and they're okay. We're going to figure out what the right thing to do is. So they're not interested in despoiling our environment. They all live here. They're interested in doing a good job. Nobody understands it well enough yet because there hasn't been a lot of decommissioning going on yet. And generally speaking, nuclear power plants haven't, you know, they've tested species in the bay for, you know, 40 or 50 years to see if they're radioactive, to make sure that something is not being discharged. But over time, I mean, every day that plant sucked in 480 million gallons to cool the reactor and then flushed it out into the bay. So we're talking about a very small remnant problem, but we're working on solving that problem. And at NDCAP, our next meeting is on Monday night. We're trying to bring people into those meetings that will help us understand what that impact is. And we have this year to figure it out.
Well, tremendous. Well, I feel very optimistic with what you're saying, and they certainly sound like they're, you know, well-intentioned and want to do what's best for the community. So I hope that's how it plays itself out. Thank you. Thank you both, Matt and Pine, for your comments. They've been very beneficial. I've certainly learned a lot. And next, I'd like to introduce again Jean Naumann, who is the chairman of our Kingston Recycling Committee, and she's going to be talking about a bylaw that's coming up at our meeting in April about single-use, or May, about single-use plastic bags. So, Jean, purpose and intent of the law.
Absolutely. We've been talking about how plastic bags and all plastics are impacting our planet. It ties in very closely with what Pine and Matt have been talking about, is protecting our environment, doing what we can as citizens to lessen the impact that we have on the environment. I want to just share a few facts that I think people may not be aware of. Up to 5 trillion plastic bags are used around the world each year. And to manufacture this, we're using roughly 600 million barrels of oil. And lately they've been also using gas. We do not know at this point how long it will take for any of this plastic to break down. But what we do know is that it's breaking down into little million sized pieces that called microplastics, and they're inhabiting our entire environment. Every time you see a plastic bag blowing in the wind, you know that little pieces are being shed all the time. That goes into the air we breathe, it goes into the ground where we grow crops, and it particularly as a coastal community, it's going into our waterways. And what happens to that? The fish eat it, we eat it. And I've seen one statistic that says the average human being consumes enough microplastic through their food and drinks to make up a credit card each year. That's a terrific amount of plastic to be put into your body. And we have no idea how that plastic is going to impact our vital organs. So it's rather scary to know that we're ingesting all of that petroleum. As we know, petroleum is a finite resource. It's, at some point we're going to run out of the gas and the oil, and it seems to be a wasteful use of petroleum to make these plastic bags. Average life of a plastic bag is estimated to be 12 to 15 minutes of actual usage, after which it's discarded. Not all plastic bags are discarded properly. There are many places where you can place your used plastic bags. All the grocery stores that issue them have a container for you to return those plastic bags. I know many people like to reuse them at home, line your trash can, use it for dog poop, whatever. But ultimately, we have to do something with that plastic bag. Too often it gets included in our recyclables, and I have to say Kingston is doing a very good job with recycling materials. However, we still find a tremendous number of plastic bags contained within our recycling bins. And what happens is when all that material gets to the recycling center where it's processed, it gums up the works. All that plastic bag wraps around the machinery, and it takes hours each day to clean all of that off of the machines so that they can properly do what they were intended to do. We also know that it's having a very negative effect on much of our wildlife. Birds, turtles, anything that's in the sea has been impacted. We've found animals that are wrapped up in this. We know many turtles, when they're found dead, contain plastic within their stomach. And we all know that that's not going to bode well for their health.
Mhm.
So we're hopeful that the town of Kingston will understand how important it is that we transition from plastic bags over to reusable shopping bags. That many people in town shop at the Big Y. They made that transition several years ago, and they encourage people to use reusable bags. We on the recycling committee over the last 4 years have purchased through grants and distributed 5,550 reusable shopping bags. So we're hoping that people are utilizing them. We're going to work with all of the retail establishments to put up signs reminding people when they get out of their car to please bring their reusable bags along with them. And we hope through this process, not only will we eliminate the plastic bags, but even the paper bags that will be allowed, because the process to produce those bags is almost as terrible for the environment as the plastic bags. So we really want to see people use reusable shopping bags. They're kept clean. They can be used hundreds of times rather than grabbing a plastic bag that only works for about 12 to 15 minutes.
Well, you make a very convincing case, and I know the Board of Health in Kingston supports your efforts in this bylaw. So thank you for that very insightful information. And Pine, you mentioned that the plastic of the credit card, it's amount that we ingest. You said it's more weekly.
It's every week, not every year, a credit card worth of.
So that makes it even more, more of an issue. But with all that said, thank you, Jean. Very, very convincing evidence. Thank you very much, Matt, Pine, Jean. It's wonderful to have good stewards of the environment in our community. It's very much appreciated by all of us. So with that, everybody stay healthy and safe.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.